And we are live.
Okay, well, welcome to the Newburyport Historical Commission meeting on Thursday, the 22nd of October, 2020. Yet another Zoom virtual meeting, as the case may be. This is a public meeting. And let me start with a roll call of the commissioners in attendance. Mr. Peter McNamee.
Present.
Okay, Mr. Joe Morgan.
Present.
Ms. Patricia Pecknick.
Present.
Mr. Ron Ziemba. Ron, I know I saw you. You were muted or something? Yeah, you're muted, Ron. We'll give Ron a minute. Oh, there's Ron. I see you, but your mic must be muted, Ron. Actually saw him twice for some reason. And who did I miss? No, any sign of Malcolm in either the attendees list or anywhere else? Andy?
No, I'll keep an eye out for him though.
Okay, and myself.
And Christopher Fay?
I'm here.
Yeah, I thought did
Oh,
I
you
miss you,
did?
Christopher? I'm sorry. I thought yep, thought I got him. And let me pardon there, I'm sure. Ron, for some reason, I have you in the meeting twice. And I'm seeing.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I switched devices.
Okay. All right. Well, yep.
But you can hear me now.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yep. One has just, I guess, is the camera on your device. Oh, okay, it just went away, but hopefully, okay. But hopefully that'll all work out. All right. Sorry, everyone, for that little, these Zoom meetings often have these minor technical glitches. Our note taker is on the phone, as well as we also have in the meeting, Andy Port, our planning director, and Caitlin Sullivan, planning staff. They will be presenting the visuals that we'll see in your shared screen for the Zoom meeting. So the commissioners are on the so-called panel and have audio enabled, although we'll try to speak one at a time. If there may very well be a public hearing for one or more items tonight. If you are a member of the public and wish to speak during one of those, you'll need to find the spot on your Zoom meeting controls to raise your hand so we know you wish to speak. And you'll be also recognized one at a time. You will probably need to unmute yourself on your device. And as per any public meeting, identify yourself, your name and address, and make your statement, keeping it within the 2-minute limit, if you don't mind. Applicants will also obviously be unmuted so they can make their various initial presentations, and during any, if there is a public comment period, they're usually allowed to respond to that as well. Okay, so quick comment. I don't know how many people are in it. I'm not seeing the attendee list at the moment, but if you're here about 93 State Street, you're certainly welcome. But 2 weeks ago, this board took extensive public comment on that particular project. That's the Institution for Savings project. We heard an extensive presentation from the applicant and their architects. So I don't plan to go through that whole thing again, and I don't plan to take public comment again because we already have done that. The only thing we really delayed to this week for time constraints was for me to collect the thoughts, ideas, and opinions and input from my fellow board members so that I can compile some sort of useful historical report for the planning board. That is our charge on that particular project. So without further delay, I think those are the announcements. The first item on the agenda, which you should see in the shared screen, is 490 Merrimack Street. There was a request to continue. I don't know if anyone's actually going to speak to it. It's not necessary, I don't think. This has been requested to continue to the meeting of November 12th. So I'm going to, unless there's a raised hand, you tell me, Andy, I'm going to assume that we don't really need to hear from anyone, but we can take a motion to continue.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. The attorney's here, but I don't think you need to take any comment. You can just move to continue as requested.
Okay. Would one of my colleagues like to propose a motion that we continue that matter to the November 12th meeting without prejudice?
So moved.
Okay, that sounded like Peter?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Second.
Thank you, Ron, for a second. So I'll go through the roll. Christopher Fay,
Yes.
Okay. Patricia Pecknick.
Yes.
Okay. Joe Morgan.
Yes.
Ron Ziemba. You're
Yes.
muted again, Ron. Okay. Thank you. Malcolm Carnwath. Do we have him? I see his. Oh, good.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you, Malcolm. Good to have you back. Peter McNamee.
Yes.
Thank you. And the chair is yes. So I believe that's everybody, and that passes unanimously. So it would appear. So that will be continued to the meeting of November 12th. The next item on the agenda, 159 Water Street, a partial demolition. And I see the presentation is queued up. I believe that is one of the MGC representation matter. So I believe it's, there's a John Minton, I believe that's representing the actual owners, and Lisa Mead representing the attorneys. Who will be presenting for that?
Mr. Chair, Lisa
Yeah.
Mead, Kellerman Costa, on behalf of the buyers of the project, Nick Hansis, and as you indicated, John Mitten's the architect on the project with
Oh,
us.
okay.
And he will be, he is on as well.
Okay, hang on just a second, please, Attorney Mead. I just want to, now, in the past, I know, don't worry, I'm not going to spring anything on you, but I decided if these things would go a little bit more cleanly if we separated the historical significance motion and decision from the any public hearing on demo plan review and so on. I know you normally have it kind of as one presentation, so I'm not going to ask you to reswizzle that on the fly or anything. But just going forward, if you could kind of plan your presentations that you could go through the historical significance discussion, we could take the motion and decision on that, and then we can deal with the demo delay part or the demo plan review part if there's going to be one. Okay.
That would be fine. In fact, this actually will lend itself to that particular process. And I
Okay.
will stop at the end of the discussion relative to the history of the site, if that pleases the chair.
That, yes, that pleases the chair. Thanks. And I took a quick look at the presentation, and yeah, I agree. I think it'll work out okay. So
Okay.
why don't I turn the floor over to you, Attorney Mead, to to talk us through the historical, what you found out about the historical nature of this particular property.
Okay, so Andy, if you can go to the next slide, please. So as the chair suggested, we're asking the board to determine whether the structure is historically significant and then whether it should be preferably preserved. And if the answer to both of those is yes, that they actually approve the proposed renovations, releasing it from delay. And if you could go on, Andy. If you can go on one more, we'll just go to the next slide. So we are, let me just say, prior to going to the actual historic significance of the property, we're proposing actually to replace the upper section of the gable in the rear addition, which is a one-story addition, and add a story on there so it matches the rest of the house. So that it's not a huge addition on the back, it's a slight change. This property is located in the AE floodplain, and the mechanicals, which are currently in the basement as part of this renovation, have to be moved to the attic to get them out of the floodplain. And so some of what we're proposing will help accomplish that. So if you go to the next slide, please, Andy. So the property is at 159 Water Street. It includes 2,963 square feet of area with 31.93 feet of frontage on Water Street. As I indicated, it's located near the Merrimack River and in the AE zone for flood zone purposes, and is improved with the single family residence. The structure is listed as contributory on the data sheets, as we've indicated here on the slide. It is a timber frame house, stylistic Victorian. There is no Form B. If you go to the next slide, please. We did a title search back to 1838. We stopped in 1838 because at the time, Moses Brown owned a significant portion of this property, including the wharfs. In the early 1800s, of course, Moses Brown was an importer of sugar and molasses and owned a rum distillery in the city. Mr. Brown died in 1827. And this particular parcel of land was left to Mr. Brown's granddaughter, Sarah White Bannister. The property at one time included a store, which was operated by Ebenezer Plummer. Ms. Bannister conveyed the property to Mr. Plummer in 1838. In or around 1929, the store was changed to a home and no longer used for commercial purposes. If you go to the next slide, Andy. So this is obviously a sketch. It's not an actual map, but you can see the property. It's actually two separate buildings. So if you see the James Steel Mill kind of on the left third of the site, this property is at the bottom of the most leftward wharf that's posing down there. Can you blow that up a little bit, Andy, maybe? There you go. So you can see she's the railroad tracks coming around, but the last wharf, that's actually at the base of Salem Street. You can see the James Steel Mill there. So this property is actually right now, currently, and we're going to see that on the next slide, right next to the sewer treatment plant. It's at the base of Salem Street on Water Street. You go to the next slide. And so this is the property right here. It's a greenhouse. If you're driving down the street, it's been on the market for a significant period of time. For, I think, obvious reasons, it's a difficult property to sell. My client has been successful in rehabilitating a couple of properties here in Newburyport with the help of John Minton, and has purchased this property to do the same. If you can go to the next slide, please. It's not in the Joppa Historic District, which of course starts further down on Bronfield Street, but it's near it. It has 1,620 square feet of living area and is a 2-story home. And so with that, Mr. Chair, actually, why don't you show the photos, Andy? Why don't you go through and show the photos so people can see it? So here are the actual photos of the house. I'm sure all of you know exactly where it is. You probably pass it regularly. I pass it at least 4 or 5 times a day. Then you can go through the next one. So that's the front. That's the east side of the house. And this is the rear east side. And these are 2 photos of the west side of the house. And this is the 1-story addition in the back that we're proposing to take the gable off of and add on top of it to match the existing gable.
Thank you. Ms. Mead, does anyone know when it was last actually lived in?
I'm
Just curious.
I'm going to guess. I think it was a little over 2 years ago. I'm not positive that, Mr. Richards. It's been on the market a significant period of time. I do recall cars down there, but you know, time flies when you're in COVID, right?
Okay, thanks very much. And you know, on this photo here, you can see at the foot where the house sort of meets the foundation, there's an odd shingled little shelf there that runs the whole length of that side, and I might be on the other side as well. That I have no idea what's going on with that, but it's interesting.
Well, I think this photo actually is good, and I'm going to stop here after that so you can make your determination, but it shows that there are actually 2 additions here. There's the original structure, which is the structure that faces Water Street. We're proposing a couple of slight changes to the windows on the part of that, but nothing else. Then you have the first addition, right, which is where the 4 windows are here.
Right.
And then you have the last addition, if you will.
Right. Right. It looks like there's a sort of maybe the remnants of a corner board or something there between them. You can sort of see.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you. So, fellow commissioners, any questions about this or comments? I can't see you all at the same time, but I'm not hearing anything. No comments, no questions. Does anyone want to feel we can go ahead and make a motion to determine that it's historically significant and preferably preserved, so we can move on with that assumption or that determination?
I move that the property is historically significant and preferably preserved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morgan. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I heard it sound like both Ron and it's either Chris or Peter. Okay, so we have a motion and a second that it is the property is historically significant and preferably preserved. Pardon me. So, Mr. Fay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Patricia Pecknick?
Yes.
Thank you. Joe Morgan?
Yes, Peter made that motion, Chair.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for the correction. And your vote, Joe, was yes, right?
Correct.
Okay. Ron Ziemba?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Malcolm Carnwath? We'll give him another minute. Maybe he can get back on while waiting for Malcolm. Peter McNamee?
Yes.
Okay, and the chair is a yes. So let's see, where is Ron? Did we lose him? No, not Ron. I mean Malcolm.
Looks like he may have lost his connection.
Okay. Well, so we still have enough to carry the motion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yes votes. So that motion is carried. So we can, we'll move to the demolition plan review and public hearing on that. Why don't we start with the applicant's presentation of the demolition plan, which I imagine, I know you usually include both the demolition plan and some discussion of what you plan to do, which is, perfectly fine and appropriate. So why don't you pick it up there, Attorney Mead?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I think this photograph is good for a particular reason. You'll see there's a chimney on the first edition in the back. That is not actually a chimney for fireplaces. That's a utility flue. And you will be able to see that on the floor plans. However, the existing condition plans, it got left off of, and we're proposing to remove that chimney. But since we're at this slide, I thought it was important to show A, that it's in the first edition, and B, when you see the existing floor plans, you'll see that it actually is a utility chase. As I indicated before, all of the mechanicals which are currently in the basement are going to have to be moved to the attic. And so that will perform no further function for the house.
Okay, pardon the interruption, Attorney Mead. I think I had totally missed what I think you just pointed out. I see the brick chimney, and a few feet towards Water Street, there's that little something there on the roof. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm referring to the brick chimney.
Oh, okay. So what's that other thing poking through the roof there?
Well, there's a water closet up there, so it may be a vent for the water
Oh,
closet.
just a vent for
but
that.
I don't know
Okay.
specifically what it is.
All right, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. So if you go to the next slide, please, Andy. So you'll see, and what's important about the site plan is that while it appears as though there is a backyard, there's a drop in the elevation, and essentially you're sitting in the middle of the sewer treatment plant. So one of the part of the proposals is a little porch that's part of the second floor addition that we're adding in the rear. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So these are the existing floor plans. You'll see there's a 3/4 bath on the first floor, and you can see that chimney right in the middle of the floor plan. And that's actually utility chase.
And those dotted lines, Attorney Mead, are those like part of the timber framing or what?
I believe John, if John's on, he can answer that, but I think the answer is yes, those are part of the timber framing. So, and if you can go to the next slide. So this is the current second floor plan. You'll see that there's a water closet on the second floor and a couple of bedrooms. And then again, you can see that the utility chase that is the chimney that goes up from the basement. And the next slide, please. So these are the existing elevations. The front elevation isn't changing at all. The rear elevation, you'll see in a minute, we have the demolition plans. That end gable comes off of the lower part, and then there's an addition built on top of that. And the next slide, please. And so this is the existing right side or east elevation. And you'll see that corner board there where that first addition was added. And there will be some changes you're going to see in that on this elevation when we get to the renovations. Next slide, thank you. And this is the left side elevation or the west elevation. Again, John has marked off the original historic residence on this elevation. And if you go to the next slide, please. So I said the proposal, of course, is to remove and replace that upper section of the rear addition, creating a full head height for a bathroom on the second floor, and then a little bit of outdoor space with a patio on that second floor, or a porch, if you will. So when we get there, you'll see that there's a half bath with a entryway into the attic, a pull down entryway into the attic. And so we can go to the next slide, please, Andy. So here's the demolition plan, and you can see where the demolition is occurring on the back, and the movement of the windows that exist, and the installation of flood vents.
Yeah, could you explain what the function of those is very briefly? Just curious.
Pardon me?
Curious as to the function of those flood vents. What exactly are they supposed to do?
I'm going to let
Okay.
Nitin
That's fine.
explain the functionality of flood vents. I
Yeah,
suspect
we
it's
don't-
to
yeah, I was
allow
just-
water to move in and out, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Attorney Mead, I'm not sure, is he in the audience with us this evening? We're not seeing him.
He's he's calling in. Andy, you had the phone number earlier.
Yeah, his number doesn't appear to be here, though.
Okay, so I can't explain the function of the flood vents.
Yeah, that's fine.
Except for that
Not a
they are
problem.
required if you have construction in the flood zone.
Yep, not a problem.
If we go to the next slide, please. So here's the changes that's going to occur on the east elevation. You'll see some changes in the window locations on that later addition, one change on the front addition, and the changes in the back. And while we're on this elevation, I'll just tell you the proposed siding will be cedar clapboard on the original structure, cedar shingles or shakes on the two new additions, if you will, newer additions. The windows will be the narrow profile, divided light with spacer bars in between. So there's the simulated divider light with the divisions on both sides of the windows. And the next slide, please, Andy. And so here's the west elevation, and you can see the changes to the windows on this, and you'll understand these changes when we get to the floor plan, so you can see how the house is laid out. John kept, as you can see again, changes that are minimal, particularly on this side, none, to the original historic structure. Next slide, please. And so here's the first floor plan. It's a 2-bedroom house. He's not making it any more than that. It's going to have 2 bathrooms on the first floor. Then we'll go to the next slide, please, Andy. The second floor, we'll have a family room up front towards Water Street. As you can see in the back where we're getting a little bit of space is that half bath and the hatch into the attic so we can access the mechanicals. The kitchen and living space are up there, and then there's that little balcony off the back. Next slide, please, Andy. And here the changes are in elevation. So we have the proposed front elevation. Again, no changes are occurring. And here's that rear elevation. So John used a change of materials to differentiate the old from the new. And he included in that when we get to the side elevation, the first edition as well as this second edition. And if you get to the next slide, please, Andy. And here's the proposed right side elevation or the east. And the next. And the west side elevation. So I think that our request is that you release it from demo delay to allow these improvements to occur. These are modest changes to allow this house to be functioning again. It has its challenges given its location, and we are trying to have minimal impact on the historic structure, but allow it to have some attractiveness by having that porch on the second floor for some outdoor space. Because as I remind you, being in the backyard is like being in, quite frankly, close to closer than comfort to the sewer treatment plant. So with that, I'd request the board vote to remove this from delay.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. Obviously, before we do that, there is a period for a public hearing. So before we begin any deliberation or questions from the board, I'll formally open the public hearing period. This is the time if you're a member of the public and wish to make a comment, pro, con, neutral, whatever, on this particular project, please use the function of the Zoom meeting to raise your hand so Director Port can see you and unmute your audio. And you will need to also unmute your audio locally on your device if you wish to speak. So I'll give a few moments for anyone to raise a hand that want to, and I'll ask Andy if you are seeing any hands going up.
Sure. And while we wait just a second to see if anyone is interested, just wanted to add as well, we do have one caller, and those who are calling in should be able to press the key sequence *9 if they're interested in raising their hands and speaking, just so that we know and we can unmute them. I'm not seeing any hands at this time, though.
Okay. I'll give one more second. I'll make a note here. So it's *9 to raise a hand.
That's correct. Yep.
Is there a sequence to unmute yourself?
Yeah. After that, after someone has raised their hand to let us know they'd like to speak, then we would ask them, and we would note this *6 to unmute themselves.
Okay. I just want to make a note. I can add that to my little preamble. All right. Still no hands?
None at this time.
Okay. Well, I think we've probably allowed enough time. I'm going to close the public hearing period. Make a note here. And I'll return to my fellow commissioners. Does anyone have a question for the applicant or attorney architect? Did we ever find now Mr. Minton is the architect, right? Did we ever find him on the phone or available, or are we going to assume that he's not available?
We're not seeing him in our audience.
Okay.
It's not clear when
Okay.
we have the connection issue. Not sure.
Okay. All right. Well, in any event, we do have Attorney Mead here. Does any of the commissioners have a question, comment, anything at all? Raise a hand, speak up, do something. Oh, Patricia, you visually raised your hand. Good, I caught you. Ms. Pecknick, you have the floor.
I think it will be wonderful to see a project bring this house back to a form that is much more attractive, and I'm very pleased by the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from my fellow commissioners?
I'm in agreement with Patricia.
Okay, that sounded like Mr. McNamee.
Yes.
Okay. I'll comment that I do too. I did have one quick question on both the or on neither, I should say, the proposed drawing elevations or existing. The chimney wasn't appearing. What did you? But you commented on the beginning. So what were you saying? Is the chimney to go or to stay, or what, Ms. Mead?
Yeah, it's to go. And I was pointing out that the existing elevations neglected to include it. And you
Okay.
can see it in the photograph, but it was
okay.
purposefully left out of the proposed elevations because it actually is a utility chase and not a chimney. For
Right.
a home.
So, yeah, there's some sort of heating system or something. So the utilities that are going up into the attic, I assume they'll have some other way of whatever venting they require will be accomplished through some other means, I assume.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, one last call for questions or comments. Not really seeing any. Would anyone like
There are
to?
a couple hands up. Mr.
Oh, I'm
Fay
sorry.
from Morgan.
Okay, maybe I need to turn this on so I can, okay, now I can see the hands. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Fay, since you're first on my list there. Christopher, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, say I don't love the tiny little sort of porch roof deck in the back, but considering the overall condition of the house and stuff like that, I'll take the greater good here. But
Okay.
I don't want people to misinterpret my voting for this for a love of the roof deck, as ever tiny as it may be.
Okay, it's interesting you should point that out because I was thinking when I saw this, with the possible exception of that sort of Doric column, which is a little bit odd, I thought that the way that is sort of enclosed little quasi porch patio, whatever you want to call it, on the second floor, I thought that was somewhat less objectionable than some of the roof decks we've seen, which stick out a little bit more sore thumb-ishly.
It's less objectionable is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Mr. Morgan, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree. I think it's a great project. Looks like, they're trying to rejuvenate this property, which needs some tender loving care, obviously. My only comment is that the materials scope be called out, that we have access to that. I think that what happened on 123 State Street, I think was very successful. From my opinion, is that we saw really detailed notes on all of the scope of exterior trim and the description of all materials. And I think if we see that and that can be included, then there's really no question going forward as to actually what is expected of the applicant in the restoration of the exterior.
Mr. Chair, could I just comment on that? What I would request the board, so that the applicant doesn't have to come back, with all due respect, as much as I enjoy spending my time here in the evening, is that you make that a condition prior to the issuance of a building permit, that the materials and really, we're talking about cedar clapboards and cedar shingles, and the appropriate windows that I mentioned, which I had received from Mr. Minton earlier. If you could do that, this is a much less complicated structure than 123 State Street. I would appreciate it. I'm sure my client would appreciate it. We're off to the zoning board next, and happy to do it prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Okay, I'm making some notes here. So help me out here. I've got cedar clapboards, cedar shingles or / shakes, whatever you want to call them, on newer section. 6/6 simulated divided light windows. I assume those are like wood with like some cladding on the exterior or something like that.
I think they're, given the location of the property, I don't think that they're wood. I think they're aluminum clad, I believe, and they are the narrow profile with the spacer bars both inside and out. I mean, the spacer bar in the middle with the separate grills inside and out.
Right. Okay, so yes, I think those are usually referred to. Am I correct that those are considered simulated divided light?
Yes.
Joe, can you think of anything else that we should specify being called out? There's not a heck of a lot of trim there, really.
Yeah, I think though that we would see that called out, the corner boards. It's really a material scope of items to be replaced. It looks like a lot of it is in pretty bad shape on the existing building, and I assume that much of it, if not most, will be replaced. But I think, just as for the record, it would be good to have those notes on the drawing. Eventually, they're going to get here anyway, so we might as well see that at some point to establish a benchmark.
Okay. Well, I've got that list. So yeah, Attorney Mead, I think we can accomplish that. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing. So to save time, I'll try to craft the motion myself here and then see if someone was willing to second that. So the motion would be that we release the project for a demolition permit for following these plans as submitted tonight, with the condition that the specific materials be called out, including but not exclusively, or including that the clapboards in the front historic section be cedar clapboards, cedar shingles or shakes on the newer section, 6/6 simulated divided light windows, and specific call out for trim materials such as the window trim and corner boards, be identified prior to the issuing of the actual permit. Is that, Mr. Morgan, does that sound like it's meeting both, your expectations?
Absolutely, that's perfectly fair. And I move
Okay.
that we adopt that language, and I make a motion to adopt that language and provide the the removal of the demolition delay.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, was that Peter?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Let's say making a note here. Okay, so let's go around the roll call. Mr. Fay.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Pecknick.
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Ron Ziemba.
Yes.
Mr. Peter McNamee.
Yes.
And the chair is a yes. And do we have Malcolm back? Not seeing him again. All right, so we'll skip Malcolm then. Hang on a second. Okay, so that motion passes. So I'm just pausing here because I'm trying to think of the most expedient way to meet that condition, Attorney Mead, so that we can resolve this in a way that we're satisfied and the building commissioner is satisfied and your client, has the final plans we can go on and all that. Is that something that you can have either the architect or someone submit to the planning office, sometime within the next week or so?
Yes, we'll ask the architect to do that for sure, because as soon as we're done with the zoning board, they're going to want to pull a building permit. So
Right.
We will definitely do that.
Okay, I'll make a note here. Applicant to submit. Thank you very much. Okay, good. Forgive me for trying to keep up and make my notes and keep everything going here. I believe we are then done with 159 Water Street as far as this meeting anyway. So next, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 93 State Street, Institution for Savings, commonly known as. This is a Demolition Overlay District Advisory Review. I'm not going to go into the entire history. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the year. I know I'd be surprised if anyone wasn't familiar with it, but the high points are that this is roughly if we issue an advisory review again, which I expect we will, it will be the third one. The first was 13th of February this year. Then there was another one on 25th of June. And this is the third go round. 2 weeks ago, there was a presentation by the applicant, which went through plans, elevations, renderings, and so forth. And we also took public comment at that time, which was fairly extensive. We heard similar comments as we heard the first go around, a little, some reflective of the newer thing, but some pretty much echoing earlier concerns. But my goal tonight is to go around with my fellow board members here to collect their thoughts so that I can compile them into this third advisory review. One quick thing.
Could you recognize Mr. McNamee before we start on this?
Oh, he probably wants to say that he's recusing himself. Am I right, Peter?
Once again, because I'm an interested party, yes, I'm going to recuse myself. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and I had it in my notes to mention that, and there it is, right smacking me in the face, and I forgot to point it out. Thank you, Peter. So Mr. McNamee I'm not sure he's in a butter, but is a near neighbor and is an interested party, so he's recused himself from this particular matter. Thank you, Peter. Anyway, so Attorney Mead, I assume you're still speaking on behalf of the applicant. Although we're not going through the entire presentation again, I thought if you want to just make any brief comments or updates since we last spoke 2 weeks ago, you can have the floor for a couple of minutes to do that before I go around with my fellow commissioners. Do you wish to do that?
I think I'd prefer to respond to any questions. Christopher Angelakis is on, as well as Shreya Shah, who are the architects on the project. And I think that we had some discussion last week 2 weeks ago by Mr. Morgan relative and some others relative to the location and now differentiation of the proposed addition as compared to the historical structure, and how it actually is now separate and apart from it. And the discussion relative to the massing and scale being appropriate for the neighborhood. So I think I'd like to just hear what the commission has to say and then answer any questions that Christopher and I need to.
Okay, that sounds fine. And I'll abuse my right here as chair to kick it off. I had a question that was on my mind, so I'll start there. And this is a question for not sure if it's either for you or the architect. One of the things that we all heard a lot of, people would generically use the term size, or they might say massing, or they might say height, or whatever, but there's still a lot of concern about that. And it seems to me that a lot of what's driving that is the parking system that's on the first floor, because that's driving the height of the first floor to about 16 feet, which is, obviously higher than a typical first floor would be. And I think that kind of sets the stage for everything else above it to also be higher than normal. So my question is, was there any was there any research or any consideration of whether it'd be possible to somehow bring that whole parking system, down a few feet, so that that first floor ceiling height and eave height, that whole thing could be much more on a par with a residential type of, environment?
So I think that's a really good question, Mr. Chair. So the parking is compressed as it can be. We actually cannot go down any other levels within the building. We have one level below grade, which is what the fire department will approve. They won't approve anything less than that. I think, though, that it is important from the very first concept design of this current design that we had, there was some concerns relative to the eave height. And I'll let Christopher address that in a minute, but we did bring the eave height down from that. So the eave height is now at 25, and the buildings across the street, which are actually much larger buildings, both by their frontage along Prospect Street and their depth into away from Prospect Street, are just over a foot shorter than that. So this structure is not out of line with the surrounding neighborhood. And I think that's a good handoff to Christopher about how they designed these sections and the height of the building.
All right, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the commission. We took a brand new look at this parking system, and we pushed the manufacturer. We pushed all the limits to see how compressed we can get it, and then we took the extra step while we're redesigning this to actually have the structural engineering done to really push the limits of how we can compress this building down, knowing that eave heights are very sensitive. So by going through that effort and really kind of sharpening our pencil on both the kind of mechanical workings of the building and the structural design of the building, we're able to bring the eave height down a foot. I think we brought it down more than a foot. And we took a look at every element to try to make sure that a kind of appropriateness with the neighborhood was taken, including the way the massing is broke down to make sure that these masses visually act as single buildings that are, like Attorney Mead said, are both in some cases big, smaller than the frontage of the adjacent buildings. So that is, there's a lot of effort put into being as sensitive as possible to all that stuff, and that's sort of the hallmark of this approach.
Yeah. How about what I can't think of a better term other than attic space. Above the row of windows, the second floor has office space primarily, and you have the pitched or gabled roof. Was there any, I don't know if you've got cathedral ceilings in there or just a regular ceiling, but it also occurred to me that perhaps with a shallower roof pitch, the peak or ridge height could be lowered a bit. Was there any thought given to that?
Absolutely. We tested a whole number of roof pitches, and it's very difficult to hit the right balance because when you're looking at the colonial forms, which there are a fair amount of them in this area, this is the kind of roof pitch that's most common. We could look at shallower roof pitches that kind of are less colonial in nature. There are other examples in the neighborhood that do that. We are right now using the gable, the space in the gable ends to hide all of the mechanicals so that there is no mechanical equipment of any size that can be seen from the public way, or we've even tested the views from second floor windows of adjacent buildings. So those gables are doing a lot of work for us, and they are doing a lot of work for aesthetic appropriateness, but also keeping architectural clutter to a minimum.
Yeah, I do understand the bit about the pitch. I know actually in some of the older houses, the pitch is shallower, but most of the houses in this neighborhood are of a vintage that have a pitch that is pretty close to what you've got there. So I would agree with that. This view that Andy is sharing right now, and I'll shut up in a minute, but it's a good example of that. Even because of the height of that first floor, you can see, the Griffin property there that abuts on Otis Place. It's kind of unfortunate that because that house is probably smaller than average. It's not a big structure, so it's a little bit unfair comparison, but it's a good one in that you can see that the first floor windows of your proposed structure and his are about the same place, but then the second floor of the proposed structure is like much higher than that second floor of the old structure there next door, and I assume it's largely due to that parking system, but we already talked about that. So
it's fully due to that, so that the sill height can be of human sill heights when you're inside the building. This building does walk the line of being sensitive in part of the neighborhood, but also still a commercial building.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me be quiet here for a minute and see what my fellow commissioners have to say. Would anyone like to make a comment? I have my display, so you can either raise a hand or, because I can't see all of you at once. So if you raise it by waving, I may or may not see it, but surely someone would. Do I have to call on people? Except Mr. Mac. Oh, Joe Morgan, thank you for stepping forward. You have a comment?
Yes, I agree entirely with Mr. Angelakis. I think that what you're seeing here is still an interpretation of a residential residential palette of materials and proportions. Clearly the program has had to drive some of these to create somewhat of an amplified, muscled kind of residential expression. But I believe that, what Mr. Angelakis has not said is that they have played with the sill height of the upper windows relative to that 16-foot floor in order to produce a better, harmony in those first and second floor window relationships, even though the windows are larger than the neighboring residential windows. Overall, I find that the proportions, unless you really scrutinize the dimensions of all of those openings, they still feel residential. But I don't want to spend more time on that. I think that I had said what I needed to say last time regarding how I think that the architects has achieved what I thought were critical features in order to make the building more historical in its setting. So I feel comfortable, and I still feel comfortable. The only question I have is, why are the windows, why do they not have a trim associated with them? I find that it's a little bit too abstract to have a window in this type of historical idiom, you know, not having any type of board trim around the perimeter. So if the architect could speak to that. Thank you.
Mr. Angelakis, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think there is a board trim. I think at the scale, it might be reading too thin, maybe. And, you know, we could certainly, that is something we would certainly entertain to make wider trim, you know, but there is intended to be a trim around these windows.
Do you know what it consists of, or is it one of those details that's TBA, or?
It would be painted wood trim.
So basically, yeah, and I know this gets into that difficult where they draw the line between being too imitative of a residential structure, given that it is a commercial structure and so on and so forth. But, you know, so you want to blend, but so I totally understand that balance you're walking there. But yeah, trying to think of this. If you can think of any either renderings or elevations that you have that might better show that, that would be, or any place where it might be called out, you know, what the trim is, that would be great. Either that, or we can just, you know, leave that as our comment for the planning board to look at.
You know, if it again doesn't show clearly enough on the provided elevations, then we can provide a more detailed view of it.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mr. Angelakis. Who else? Joe, your hand is still up, but I assume you're all set, right? Okay. Anyone else have a comment? Either maybe Mr. Fay or Ron or Patricia. Anyone like to say a few words? I would like to, you know, and make sure that any report kind of, okay, Christopher, I see your hand went up. What would you like to say?
I mean, I don't have anything new to add than what I've said in the past, but I'll just say the same thing over. You know, I walked down this State Street a couple of days ago. I stopped, I looked at the bank from the front. You see the beautiful building. You see this weird addition in the back that probably should have never been done. And then you sort of see the emptiness, and I tried to imagine it. And it's, you know, one of the things that struck me is it looks great. It really does. I think the combination of suggestions that we provided and the work that's been done here looks great. It's just doesn't look great here. You know, it would be great if we did buildings like this, you know, other places in the city, outside of the downtown, outside of historic areas, out in the plazas. If they had, you know, done the plazas like this, how much nicer would it be? I just don't think it works. It looks, again, like a serpent. The way it is currently constituted, this addition would do more to that, and it's just to you know, beat down on a metaphor. It's going to swallow up this neighborhood. And I think maybe the other slide, is that aerial view. It's just shocking to me, how what the size of the footprint is. So I don't have anything new to add. I just have the old stuff to add. I don't support this. Unfortunately, I just don't support it.
Okay. So so when you say
Glenn,
looks great but doesn't look, okay,
Excuse
yeah,
me,
I'll get
Glenn.
to you in just 1 second, Ron. I just want to clarify one thing. When you say looks
Okay.
great but doesn't look great here, you're saying in the context of this little neighborhood. Is that what you mean, Chris?
I think it's a good idea, but it, you know, it fits the city. It just doesn't fit the city.
Right.
Doesn't, you know, if it was out at the other, I believe there's another branch or another set of buildings out, you know, near the Dunkin' Donuts on one.
Yeah, Story F, yeah.
It would be good. And that's a beautiful building. And it fits there. You know, it's the best building in the area. you know, a lot of people do this. Like they have these types of regulations. You know, I think about like Freeport, you know, their McDonald's looks like this, right?
Mm.
But it's not in a downtown historic
Mm.
area. And it's just,
Okay.
I would say the neighborhood doesn't support it. So I don't know why we're you know, people are pushing for this. As I wouldn't want this across from me, next to me, down the street from me. You know?
Got it. All right. Thanks, Chris.
And I think it's one more thing. I know it's zoned for commercial, you know, it doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because it's zoned for that doesn't mean you have to go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Right.
Now, Ron, did you want to get a few words in?
Yes, if I can.
Yes, go right ahead.
My raise hand button does not seem to be working.
Okay,
so
we got you.
I had to break in on you.
No problem.
You know, I think we've reached an impasse on this very, very important community issue. Both sides have tenaciously defended their point of view, and the last two speakers, you know, were a perfect example of that. Understandably enough, the bank feels that it ought to be able to determine the nature of the structure to be built on its own property. As is customary for the petitioner in cases like this, the bank, somewhat grudgingly, in my opinion, has made some concessions to modify its proposal, but that has been met with nearly unanimous opposition from the neighbors. They are resisting what they see as a power grab by the bank to build a structure that will ruin their neighborhood. There seems to be no common ground here, no solution which will make both parties 100% thrilled with the result. And I hope everybody understands that these are my opinions and no others. But I went through the proposals, including the current one, to look for a solution which might make the parties a little less than 100% thrilled, but at a minimum, agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, a compromise. I believe the proposal that holds the most promise for compromise, at least for me, is the proposal to build a structure, the one we've been looking at, build a structure that houses parking and offices inside, but from the outside looks just like another neighborhood residential building or a cluster of residential buildings in the neighborhood. And I think, unless I misread the drawings that I've seen, it seems to me that the architect has gone to some considerable lengths to make this not just another looking like a residential neighborhood, but a residential neighborhood that fits with the buildings on Otis Street and Prospect Street. And so I would disagree with Commissioner Fay on this, and agree with Commissioner Morgan. And I think that, especially now that the ridge height has been lowered, maybe we can take another look at this option and form a majority around it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's all I have.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that if it wasn't for that darned parking system that drives the extra height on that first floor, I think more people would agree with that sentiment, because I think I would agree with both you and Joe that, you know, they have done a good job of at least stylistically making it a much more harmonious fit in the neighborhood, especially when you contrast it to the original proposals. So I see Ms. Becknick has a hand up. What would you like to say, Patricia? Patricia?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I got bounced off and I'm on my phone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, okay. So the DOD ordinance, as we all know, requires our adherence to any relevant provisions of the Secretary of the Interior standards as they may be amended from time to time, including all related guidelines, bulletins, and other official guidance promulgated by the National Park Service. So the National Park Service interprets the standards in its various bulletins. So I went through what those related guidelines and bulletins and the official guidance says about additions to historic buildings and how to assess their impact on an historic neighborhood. So I want to go through the first one. In its Technical Preservation Services brief on new additions to historic buildings, the National Park Service explains that in accordance with Standard 9, a new addition must be compatible with the historic building's massing, size, and scale. So here's the quote. The size, scale, and massing of a new addition all pertain to the addition's overall volume and three-dimensional qualities. Taken together, size, scale, and massing are critical elements for ensuring that a new addition is subordinate to the historic building. Typically, a compatible addition should be smaller than the historic building in both height and footprint. Depending on its location, it may be possible that an addition slightly taller or slightly larger than the historic building may be acceptable as long as it is visually subordinate to the historic building. Okay, then I looked at the National Park Service brief called New Additions in Densely Built Environments. So the National Park Service says that the addition must respect the scale of the historic building and those buildings around it. Here's the quote. Height and setback from the street should generally be consistent with those of the historic building and other surrounding buildings. So even if the facade of the addition can be broken up into elements that are consistent with the scale of the historic building, they have to be consistent with the scale of adjacent buildings. The third publication I looked at is the brief New Exterior Additions on Historic Buildings, Preservation Concerns, in which the National Park Service says, quote, a new addition should always be subordinate and not compete in size or scale. And although the appropriate size can't be stated in a square footage ratio, the size and setting help define the general parameters for enlargement, and correctly assessing the relationship between actual size and relative scale is the key. End quote. The terms size, scale, and massing are repeated throughout National Park Service publications in relation to the historic structure and to the setting and the context buildings. The next publication I looked at, New Additions to Historic Buildings, says that, quote, when visible and in close proximity to historic buildings, the new construction must be subordinate to those buildings. The fifth one I looked at is called New Construction Within the Boundaries of Historic Properties, Technical Preservation Service brief, meaning new construction on the same lot as an historic property. And that says that the limitations on the size, scale of the new construction may be less critical the farther it is located from any other historic building. So the quote is, protecting the historic setting and context of a property, including the degree of open space and building density, must always be considered when planning new construction on an historic site. The next one I looked at, New Exterior Additions to Historic Buildings, Preservation Concerns, Guidance on New Additions. The Park Service says that, quote, certain types of historic structures may be so massive in size that a relatively large scale addition may not compromise the historic character, provided, of course, that the addition is smaller than the historic building. Occasionally, the visible size of an addition can be reduced by placing some of the spaces or support systems in a part of the structure that is underground. Next, I looked at a document called Incompatible New Additions to Historic Buildings, and I can't show that to you, but there's an illustration in figure 16 that says that doubling the size of an historic building means it won't meet the standards. The next one I looked at is called Designing a New Exterior Addition to an Historic Building, and the Park Service says, quote, the new addition should be smaller than the historic building. It should be subordinate in both size and design to the historic building. The last one I will quote from today, New Additions in Densely Built Environments, says, it's important to design an addition that will have the least impact on the historic building and district, and that the addition has to reinforce the scale and character of the district. So after looking at those, I thought, what is the character of the DOD? There is a visual aesthetic coherence.
The district is punctuated with these occasional buildings of extraordinary architectural form, including institutional structures like churches, the Custom House, City Hall. On residential streets like Otis and Prospect and Garden, the individuality of each of those houses is subordinated to the harmony of the streetscape. And those houses form part of this bank setting within the DOD. The Department of the Interior continually emphasizes the need to protect the historic setting and context of the property, the building site and environment, and other surrounding historic buildings. Speaking just as myself, without having read any of that, you know, do I love Joe Morgan's idea about how to make the design of the addition fit in better? And do I respect all the work that these architects put into the design? I very much do. I think that these architects are very impressive. I think the design seeks to put the structure into conversation with the residential buildings by trying to break up the massing and incorporating these design elements from the historic houses. I love the wooden painted doors. I don't love everything. I don't like the one-story structure on the corner of Otis and Prospect. I don't like the height of the structure next to Mark Griffin's house. But what I like or not like is not important, because after reading all the bulletins and guidelines from the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service and the DOD ordinance about additions to historic buildings in historic neighborhoods and applying it to this project, then as a member of this commission, I can do no other than conclude that this project has too much height and too much volume to be shoehorned into the historic neighborhood context. Whether it needs to be scaled back, brought down, pulled in, put under, I don't know the solution. People have worked very hard on it. People have fought really hard against it. But there's an ordinance that requires compliance with preservation zoning laws, and this commission is required to advise the planning board based on that criteria. Under that criteria, this plan is too grandiose for this setting and will have a negative impact on other historic assets in the neighborhood. Finally, I did also look to the National Trust for Historic Preservation's explication of the Secretary's standards as they apply to new construction in historic districts and to additions. Specifically, the section on how to determine compatibility for new construction in a relatively visually consistent historic district. That's how specific their publication is. And I find it helpful to go through this 5-step process that they call by its acronym FRESH. So the F is for the footprint and foundation, and it says the footprint and foundation of the new structure should be similar to the ones surrounding the new structure. R is for roof shape. The new roof should match existing roofs in pitch, complexity, and orientation. E is for the building envelope. The envelope of the new structure should match the existing buildings in projection, height, bulk, and relationships between height and width. S is skin. New structures should be clad in a visually and physically similar material as adjacent historic structures. H is for holes. The windows and doors should be divided and segmented in a way that comports with the historic structure. Using that formula, the footprint and envelope criteria were what makes the addition as proposed incompatible in that setting in terms of height, massing, proportion, and scale. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. That was, I really appreciate the depth of the research that you did on that. And it's very helpful. Well, anyway, it's very helpful in one way. It's less helpful in the other way, that it does really highlight the that kind of annoying position, in that you know, we all recognize how far this proposal has come, all the hard work that the architects and the applicants have done on it. And yet there appear to be these kind of insurmountable things going on. Now, your hand is still up. You said you're on the phone right now, Patricia?
Yes, I'll try to put my hand down.
Yeah, I know *9 raises it, so I don't know, maybe *9 will lower it. I don't know.
Okay, I'll try. Ignore me until I yell.
Okay, very good. Were you all set, Patricia, as far as comments?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, any other member of our gang here I have a comment. We've heard from Joe, Ron. I guess we've heard from just about everybody. Peter has recused himself, so we won't be hearing from Peter. I've asked a couple of questions. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. I will, compile all this. I'll kind of wrap this up. It's a tough one. I'll give one last brief opportunity for either the architect or the attorney, Ms. Mead, if you'd like to make any, kind of closing remarks or anything before we move on to the next agenda item, however.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that I actually might disagree with the analysis that Ms. Pecknick did under the fresh test. And in fact, I think it actually highlights how the new design complies with those criteria. But because I am not the designer and Christopher is, I will let him have the closing comments relative to its compatibility with both the setting as well as the historic 1871 building.
Okay, that's Mr. Angelakis. Did you,
Yes.
do you want to do that?
Yes. Well, thank you. I think those standards are very important. And I think this team has read those standards over and over again, and we have did everything possible. And I think that this commission has acknowledged that we've done everything possible here to play a very nuanced hand here to do everything we can to make sure that this project is subordinate to the historic building that's 150 feet away. I would challenge that we are doing an addition to the 1871's building. I think we can all agree that that is not what's happening. This building may be placed in a historic setting, but I think we've checked off all of those check boxes to the fresh test when in relationship to the historic setting. There are certainly buildings that hold equally as large footprint. And I think that's the one that challenges us against the fresh test the best. But if you think about this building as being a building that is being placed within a historic setting and not a building that's being attached directly to a historic building, I think we can all say that this building does pass that fresh test. So, I think saying anything more would be redundant. I'm happy to respond to anyone else's comments if they wish.
I think we're okay. I'll just check in one last time. I'm not seeing any hands raised on the part of the commission. Going once, going twice. I think we're good there. Okay. No, I think we're good. I appreciate very much your attendance once again. I know it's been trying. It's been a long haul, both for the applicants, the architects, the attorneys, for everybody, and the commission, and the members of the public. Last and certainly not least, I know there are probably a lot of members of the public that are looking at in this Zoom meeting right now. I'm not keeping track of that, but I'm sure they're out there, and they're I know the public is extremely interested in this, and we'll do our best. By we, meaning the Historic Commission, will try to do its best to provide whatever meaningful guidance we can to the planning board in that report. So thank you very much for that presentation. Okay, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is, well, I was going to say next door, but it's not next door. It's across the street, 94 State Street. This is the Newburyport Public Library building. The background here is, well, this is a discussion of the preservation restriction for the public library. The public library has applied for, and I think they've got approval, tentative approval anyway, for some grant money from CPA for the HVAC system to make sure that their very valuable and important collections are well preserved. As part of that arrangement, they do need to have a preservation restriction on the property, which they should have anyway. I'll point out that because this is a building owned by the city, the Historical Commission would not be the grantee of this would be the Museum of Old Newbury. So when we get to that point, if Ms. Susan Edwards, who's with the museum, is here and would like to speak it, and that time comes, we'll certainly allow her comment on this. First, so that's the background of this, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank our member Joe Morgan for his very, very helpful work on putting together this preservation restriction, particularly the excellent description of the property. So Ms. Giselle Stevens, are you there in the attendees? Oh yeah, and I see your hand is up, great. So Andy, can you unmute Ms. Stevens so she can address the board here?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Well, first, I'd like to thank you for including me on the agenda this evening. Obviously, we are here to review the draft of the preservation restriction for the library. I do have to confess I'm new to this whole process, so I appreciate your patience. As you know, the Historical Commission did support our CPA grant application to replace the HVAC units for our archival center. And the City Council did approve that grant application with the caveat that we do get a preservation restriction for the exterior of the library, which is why we're here this evening. And I do want to thank the Museum of Old Newbury for offering to hold the PR for us. And as you did, Glenn, huge thanks to Joe Morgan, who did a lot of research in our archival center and spent a great deal of time writing the description and taking photos and putting this preservation restriction together. So I really, really appreciate it. So obviously we have a building description with photographs. Important features are included. And needless to say, there is significant historical and cultural significance of the public library. So after this, I think I'm just going to see if you have any questions as a commission. You've had a chance to look at this. This is my first preservation restriction agreement that I've ever looked at or worked on. So I'm happy to hear any suggestions, thoughts, edits, comments. As you can see from the document, there are 3 different parts of our building. There's the 1771 Tracy Mansion, which was purchased and used for a library since 1865. Then we have the Simpson Annex from the 1880s. And then, of course, the 2001 Mullen Wing, which was the addition.
Right.
And this restriction is for the exterior of the library, the entire exterior.
Right. Okay. Very good. And were there some interior historical features that were also included? I thought that might be the case. Or did I miss?
No,
Am I missing something? No.
I should mention that the Library Board of Directors, we met last night. They took a second look at the draft, and they had a discussion at our previous meeting about the possibility of including interior features. And they did unanimously decide that they did not think this was the time to include interior features. And they unanimously agreed that the draft looks terrific based on, as it goes forward. And they were very supportive of the process for having a preservation restriction for the exterior of the building.
Okay. Thank you, Giselle. Are you done?
I think so.
Okay. We'll stick around. We may have questions for you, whatever. Let me turn to my colleagues. Does anyone have a question or concern about the preservation restriction? I know I had a chance to look through it, and I don't think I saw anything. I didn't see any red flags, Giselle. It looked pretty good to me. I know there were a couple of drafts and a couple of little tweaks here and there, but I didn't see anything that stuck out to me. Did anyone else? Oh, I see a hand. Mr. Morgan has a hand up. Did you have a comment or question, Joe? Or
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for the benefit of the other commissioners, some footnotes here. I used two reference documents because, as Giselle said, she's new to this. Well, I am too. So there were a lot of blind people helping each other here.
Well, you did pretty well.
we weren't entirely blind. We had the high school template, which Caitlin shared with us, which I have used, and I've only altered the boilerplate language as necessary for purposes of indicating particular property and any particular small notes really within the text that would be relative and unique to the property. Then the other email that I referenced was the September 23rd email from Caitlin, which was a forwarded email from Michael Steinitz at MHC, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, where he had 6 bullets of things that typically should be included. And I believe that I have included them, not necessarily in the order that he listed them in that document. And I believe all the commissioners were copied on that email. There is one item, there's his number 2, the plot plan, if existing, with registry citation. I didn't see that either in the high school template, in the high school PR, and I have not included it here either, but his other 5 items are included. And those are specifically the legal property description, that's Exhibit A, the assessor's map with the parcel number, there's a blank page for that. There's I've included the MHC inventory form B, and then I have the exterior photographs, and then there is the Exhibit C, which are the restriction guidelines, which is just more boilerplate.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Joe.
I do have one question. This is Giselle.
Yep.
Looking through the photos, and again, Joe did such a terrific job on those. I wondered if it was an issue, for instance, on page 16, that the photos were taken when the trees had leaves on them, and the leaves do block some of your view of the facade. Is that an issue? Do we need to take new photos that don't include leaves?
I think that I've seen that comment in other correspondence from Michael Steinitz for other projects. So I'm anticipating that comment back from him. It's just, I don't think we're ready to take that photograph quite yet. But soon. Oh, yeah. And I failed to mention, there's one other document that he actually does not reference, which is part of these PRs that we're familiar with, and that's a list of character defining features. So that is also included as one of the baseline documents, the B series exhibits in this PR, okay?
Okay. Now, since Andy Port, wake up, I got a question for you. I would assume that if the commission is okay, likes what it sees, what we have here right now, that those things like those exhibits, like that you guys probably have and can include, and like what was it, the assessor's page, or that kind of thing, that your department, your folks, your staff can tuck those in, and is it who it can be forwarded to Mass Historical for review, and I'm a little bit unclear, do you do that, or is that up to someone on Giselle's staff to do, or is that something that Caitlin or someone on your staff can take care of?
Caitlin or I would probably end up forwarding it, just because our office more often deals with the preservation restrictions and Michael Steinitz and so forth. So it would make probably more sense that we submit it, noting and copying Giselle on that request for their review.
Yep. And let's see, I don't, okay, let's see, on the panelists. Now, Joe, your hand is still up. Are you all set? Okay, sorry. And attendees, okay, that Giselle's got a hand up, but I don't see, if Susan Edwards is on the call, I'm not seeing you there, but she could be on a phone ending in 948. Let me just make sure. No, not seeing Susan there. So I guess Susan Edwards is not here. So if she were, she would certainly be allowed to speak, but I don't think she is. If there aren't any other questions from the board, I think what we can do is have a motion to have this draft report handed over to Andy's planning department for, final preparation and, of any like missing exhibits or anything, and forwarded to Mr. Steinitz down at Mass Historical Commission for review.
Chair,
yeah.
Chair, could I just ask for a clarification?
Sure.
Just for the Office of Planning and Development, would that be a motion to approve with those adjustments to be made prior to submission to MHC, or I'm just trying to clarify if this is also the time where the commission is approving in addition to issuing the comments for edits?
Yeah. Usually what happens, Andy, and and it's a good question, is that we kind of will approve the preservation restriction, the draft preservation restriction, with the understanding that we will do a final review and approval once it's back and approved from Mass Historic. So I guess the short answer is yes, although we do want to keep that sort of on the table, so to speak, that once it's approved by Mass, because there might be some little changes or anything, that we do have that final review, that it is the last step before it goes to the city council and the mayor. Does that make sense?
Okay, so maybe just for the record, maybe just clarifying then that this would be a preliminary
Yes.
approval, or review and
Sure.
approval? Okay.
Okay, well, happy to clarify that. So the motion that I'd like to take a vote on is that the Historical Commission approves of the draft and would like it to be forwarded to the Mass Historical Commission for review, and will then have a final review and approval once it's approved and back from the Mass Historical Commission. We will take a vote on a final approval and to be forwarded on to the city council and mayor at that point. Is there a second for that motion?
I second that.
Okay, Patricia seconds. So I'll go through my roll call again. Patricia, since you just had your mic on, your vote?
Yes.
Okay, Christopher Fay?
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Ron Ziemba?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. McNamee?
Yes.
Okay, the chair is a yes. Where are we with Malcolm? Did he ever show up again? And Malcolm, if your phone number ends in 948, there's somebody on the phone near 948. If that's you, you can raise your hand or something. Was it *6? But maybe that's not you. All right, but
I've not seen him since the start of the meeting.
Okay, so but we have enough votes to pass it. So Giselle, just so we're clear, what we'll do is we'll put it together. I forget now. Joe made reference to one of the exhibits or something that needs to be just tucked in there so that it's as complete as we can make it. We'll see what they say about the trees. They may want us to take photos once the trees are a little bit more bare, but so we may just have to do that. But typically they'll they've been actually pretty good time-wise in reviewing these and getting back. They've actually been faster lately, that everything's been by email than they used to be. So hopefully they'll get it back to us with any corrections, comments, whatever, and we can get those straightened out expeditiously and get it on its way. All right, but for now we'll take the next step of moving it on to Mass Historic Commission for review. Okay.
Thank you so much. I
Sure.
really appreciate your support and your help with this.
You're quite welcome. All righty.
Chair
Yes.
Richards, may I please just we recognize and applaud Mr. Morgan for all his work on this.
Yes, we may. Maybe it was right around the time you I don't know, may have gone off and come back, but both Giselle and I did call out Mr. Morgan for his exemplary work on drafting this, and particularly the research he did and the historical, the description and so on. So
Okay, it's worth saying again. Thank you again, Joe.
One of our freshman members, Joe, and he's already certainly pulling his weight, as they say. Not to
Bravo, Joe.
Yeah. So thank you. All right, moving right along. We have another preservation restriction discussion, and I did see Mr. Ted Nelson on the attendee list. I should mention, this time I won't forget, that Mr. McNamee has let us know that he is on a friendly acquaintance basis with the Nelsons, even though he hasn't discussed this with them, but he, to avoid any appearance of bias or whatever, he is going to recuse himself from the discussion or voting on the PR for 190 High Street. So
close on the heels of Joe Morgan pulling his weight, I'm going to recuse myself.
Don't worry, I'm sure you'll have a chance to pull plenty of weight, Peter. So anyway, I'm not going to give a long explanation, but I will just give a very brief overview because this has been going on for quite a while. And when we give with Mr. Nelson, we will give you the floor to speak to this in a moment, so you can correct anything I might have wrong. But my understanding is that we reviewed a draft of this all the way back in September of 2016. Not sure if that was when I was on the board or not. It goes back a ways. So this has been going on. It's a Section 6C permit process similar to the one we had on Merrimack Street recently. So the preservation restriction is on the historic property, which is required as part of the arrangement to get that Section 6C permit. So I know Mr. Nelson has been back and forth a number of times with Mass Historical Commission, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I believe the Mass Historic Commission has given its tentative approval of this draft, which I see Mr. Port is now, or Caitlin, whoever's presenting, I think it's Andy, is got on the screen. So with that, can we, I see talking is permitted for you, Mr. Nelson, and your little image shows you with a face mask, which you can take off since you're on the phone, but I'm just joking there. So why don't you go ahead and explain to us anything that I missed and what you're looking for tonight.
Yeah, so I was a little bit friendly with Sarah White back when this whole process started, and the great mistake was she talked me into doing it myself instead of hiring an attorney to help with this. She said, oh no, it's simple. Here's an example of one and you can just take it from there. And it's been quite the 3 or 4 year journey back and forth on this. And Michael's terrific in terms of the level of detail, but frequently there was literally a 6-month turn on getting feedback. Anyway, I'm thrilled to have gotten to the point where we are, where we have their full approval, I guess is the technical language, I'm not sure, of this, and they're ready to move forward with it. So I guess we're just waiting for your approval as well. So again, I'm sure there's lots of things you need to know that I didn't think to mention, but it's been quite a process. We're thrilled to be doing this, and it's to be able to inhabit our carriage house. My wife and I have lived here for 25 years. We would love not to leave the property, but we just simply don't need the space with just the 2 of us. So it allows us to sort of reconfigure our life as well as contribute to preserving a home that we love.
Sorry, I was talking to a mute there. So I assumed, wrongly perhaps, that the carriage house was going to be either a rental or whatever, or something. Did I understand you correctly that you and your wife are going to move into the carriage house and
correct.
Sell or lease or something the main property?
We're still not decided. We were going to rent both sides, and you can imagine the spreadsheets back and forth on that. We like the control over renting it, so we may sell one. So we're still haven't figured that out yet. But basically,
okay.
So we were currently renting one side of it. We've had tenants on and off over the years, and we're excited to move into the carriage house, another structure we just love. So just experiencing the property from that perspective will be great, and then we'll figure out. We'll have lots of optionality in terms of the main structure.
When you say you said one side, you're trying to one side of the main house, so that has
the main house has always been 2 sides, and so it's easier to rent these days, and so renting out both sides makes a ton of sense. But we also may condoize. We're just not sure.
Okay, all right. Well, that's sort of secondary to the main thing that's before us. We're really talking about the preservation restriction. Before I turn over to my peers here, I did have a question as looking this over. It looked pretty good. Obviously, you and Mr. Steinitz have gone over it several times. My main question, and let's see if we can find it, Andy, it was in section 6C, the letter I. It's probably several pages up from where you are right now. Can you see if you can find that? Can you go up to the, it's probably around page 6 or 7 or so of the restriction. Let's see. All right, there's 7. Okay, yeah, I think you just about hit it on the head. Number I is, so this is a section, Ted, where, if I can be so informal, where you have carved out some, what you might call pre-approved things. It's not terribly unusual. They're not all that common either, but these are sometimes done. I know for example, the PR and the old jail property had a number of these. So this is where there's things that you want to be able to do without coming back to the commission for review and approval if they're done according to these specifications. And I was wondering, it just says additional modifications to the north side elevation, in a modern style, blah, blah, so could you elaborate a little bit on what exactly it is you have in mind there?
Yeah, so we did a pretty major modification to the back of the house a few years after we bought it. So the original house was built in 1803. Then there was a significant addition done to it in 1890. I'm not sure technically what the style is called, but we moved here from New York and it felt very pre-war to us, very different. And the back of the house had no connection to the garden. It was just a wall of clapboards 3 stories high, and you had a little porch in the bottom. So we moved the kitchen and redid the back, and we decided, instead of trying to emulate period A or period B, to actually do something that was, boldly late 20th, early 21st century. So worked with some terrific architects out of Somerville to do a very modern Asian garden inspired 3rd section, which is the back of the house, as you'll see in the images. And it's beautifully done, but sort of three centuries represented in the structure, trying to maintain the progression. And so what we wanted to preserve was the ability on the back of the house. We obviously don't want to be a slave to 1890 or 1803, and neither of those would really be appropriate to that. So we wanted to, basically be able to, the back of the house is its own style, right? And so it's different altogether. The second thing is when we applied for the special permit, and discussion happened with the planning board, was the first conversation. The conversation was always about preservation restriction to the front and left and right facades, the street-facing facades of both of the structures. But that, quite frankly, is less important to us than just preserving the obvious ability to make tweaks to the back of it in a way that is appropriate to modern times, because that's the style of the bulk of it now.
Okay. All right. That helps me a lot, because I guess I was thinking the north side elevation was the one that's sort of towards Kent Street, but I see now it's actually what you'd consider the rear of the property.
Yeah.
The south side is the one facing High Street, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that helps quite a bit.
If you look at the photos of it, you'll see that's very different,
Okay. And refresh my memory, were there interior things that were called out for preservation as well?
No.
No, just exterior.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, well, let me ask my colleagues here if someone has any questions or comments. Yes, this is the property. You've probably seen it. It's on High Street. It's a nice house. Was this one of the ones that was in Howell's book?
Yeah, it is. It's in Howell's, and I'm very proud of the fact that in the National Architectural Trust, in their inventory, the last sentence is, "This house, with its characteristic arrangement of carriage house and garden, remains one of the finest examples of High Street's federal period architecture and its survival through the 20th century." So
yeah, and that entryway is particularly nice.
Yeah,
I have to say that doorway. So I'm sure that's called out in the preservation restriction, right? I mean, it would be. I can't imagine anyone wanting to get rid of it anyway, but it's the kind of thing that whole facade just really presents a lovely face. It's interesting in that it's of the period when they were starting to build the square box type federal period house, but this one has the hipped
The sort of
roof with
origin, yeah.
dormers, which is a little bit different. It's almost like it's got one foot in the earlier Georgian kind of motif and the other foot in the more modern federal whatever. You've got the thinner window muntins and all that. So it's an interesting house, nice house.
That is.
Any Joe Morgan, I see a hand up. Would you like to comment or question?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just confirm it's the Newburyport Historical Commission. We are the grantee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So even though your proposals for the for the additions at the rear and maybe a swimming pool and all that seems very reasonable. It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair that as grantee, we wouldn't be able to see the proposal in advance because, I mean, we should be aware of what's going on, I would think. I mean, that's what we're actually being asked to do is to verify the future, well-being of this structure, historically speaking. And even though there's very little risk of presumably something really out of character being done and perhaps not even visible from the street, it still seems like we should be aware. And so our situation is different than the Mass Historical Commission. They agree in principle with what's being proposed, but they're not the ones they're not the grantees. So I just have a question on that, Mr. Chair. And if anyone else feels concerned about that, I'm just raising the question, that's all.
Yeah. And it's a really good one. Thank you, Joe. And it's a very valid point. And I'll give you an example of a similar instance where Mass Historic had given approval to a preservation restriction on a different property in Newburyport sometime in the past year. And it included some language that we had not seen that version of it before it went to Mass Historic. So it came back, I read through it and saw this language in there. So I contacted Steinitz down at Mass Historic Commission, and he said, "Oh, we just assumed that you guys were good with that. That was something you worked out with the applicant." So I said, "No, don't think so." But in that case, the applicant didn't have any problem just making an amendment to remove whatever it was we objected to. So we may be able to do a similar thing here. Joe, is it your suggestion? I think I'm sympathetic to what you're getting at here, which is that on the one hand, I understand, Mr. Nelson, you don't want, to be overly restricted and have your hands tied, especially in that area in the back. On the other hand, as you just quoted from that historical trust document, the whole affair, the historic house, the carriage house, and the gardens are sort of this integral thing. Right in the middle of that, you're entertaining ideas of maybe a swimming pool or whatever. Maybe not, but so I think Joe raises a good point that maybe we could find language that would make us feel a little more comfortable as a grantee without being overly restrictive to you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So two things. One is just a procedural question. I don't necessarily have a strong point of view because we weren't angling towards a swimming pool. Just wanted to recognize the gardens changed extensively. We've been caretakers of the core structure of the garden, but it's changed extensively over the years, and we've made modifications all the time. It's a living, breathing creature. But the fact that we've maintained an historic garden over 25 years shows sort of where we're aligned in terms of our headspace. And we've never our kids are all gone now, so there's no interest in a pool, but just wanted to preserve the optionality in terms of who knows what we might want to do. The procedural question is that the version that was initially approved when we decided to push ahead with this by your very commission, obviously a different composition of people, had that caveat in there, which was just basically, that was really just a way of saying we want to preserve the right to recognize this is a living, breathing backyard and we're not preserving the backyard. And when the planning board granted the special permit, it was conditional upon a preservation restriction that was tied to the front and the sides of the two structures, right? So it was not the entirety of the property. So I guess the question is procedurally, a previous version of this where that was in it was approved before we went to the state. And then the second piece is just recognizing the pool is really just a placeholder for, the garden's going to evolve when someone decides to take down a hedge or whatever. Do we have to, where do you draw the line, right? So actually, quite frankly, I'm happy to take the pool reference out altogether. That was less about we want to build a pool. It was more about just recognizing, at some point it becomes so draconian, it becomes, unworkable. And procedurally, it was approved with that reference. So again, happy to pull that out, not angling towards the pool. It's really just recognizing maintaining a garden for 25 years, you make a million decisions, and that's is what it is.
Yeah, and I think we can reach an agreement, Ted, because, for example, often these, I don't remember if Hannah of yours has that addendum on the back where it describes what is major, what is minor, what are the kinds of things you can do without prior approval versus, for example, ordinary repairs of replacement in kind and so on. You don't need to come in for approval and so on. So there can be a similar kind of thing. For example, the garden. I understand your point. So it can be spelled out that the kinds of relative well, I guess I might have to think about that a little bit as exactly how to word it. But that I see your point about gardens evolve, right? And I'm sure it has evolved quite a bit over the years, while still kind of maintaining its overall effect. All right, which sounds like what you're getting at. I think Joe's point is, we do want to at least have some protection against, because let's face it, in 10, 15, 20 years, probably none of, at least I probably won't be around. I don't know, who knows which of us will be around and in position to enforce this. So we want to at least have some degree of assurance that things won't get too far. So I'm trying to think of the best way to resolve this in the time we have. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Just we're all aware of the debate in 15 minutes. So I'm happy to take the pool out. I mean, we put the pool in major, so it was not about a pool. So if we put the pool in the major category, so it has to be approved. That's totally fine by me. It's in terms of just if that's the issue.
Okay. What do you, Joe? Since you brought that up, what's your opinion on that, or anyone else for that matter? Patricia, Ron, Chris, anyone else have any opinion on that?
It really wasn't about the swimming pool. I could actually be pretty sympathetic to a swimming pool. That's really not the point at all. The point really is that if we're being designated as stewards in some fashion for this building, we should be aware of any physical changes made to the structure, including additions. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And I think that's a fair request. It's not to limit or restrict what can be done either to the building or the site. I'm just saying that we're being called upon to become to represent in some fashion some level of stewardship, and I just think that we shouldn't be excluded from seeing certain types of changes that might occur.
I think that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah,
So,
amen. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Just I'm sorry. So just so I understand. So, if an outbuilding is put in, or a pool, or any kind of an addition, you should be made aware of that.
Yeah. Here's what I'm thinking, Mr. Nelson. I'm thinking of making a motion to have the commission kind of grant a condition approval and give me the go ahead to work with you offline to make those minor tweaks to the wording of that section, so that I think I understand completely what Joe is interested in. I agree. I think Patricia also agrees. I think we pretty much all would agree with that, because he makes a good point that as the grantee / steward, we should at least be aware of change. And I don't think it'll be all that hard for us to come up with the specific wording. I just don't want to try to have to do it right this minute in the middle of the Zoom meeting. But we're practically neighbors. I'm sure we can hammer that out quite expeditiously. So if the board is agreeable to that, I would make a motion that that the board is okay in principle with this draft, with the proviso that Mr. Nelson and myself rework the wording of that section to protect our interest as grantee stewards, so that we're kept informed of changes, while still allowing a certain amount of flexibility for the changes that the owners need to make that are not visible from a public way anyway. Does that sound reasonable, team? I see Patricia nodding and thumbing up. Okay, so that's the motion. Does anyone have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay, that sounded like Mr. Fay. So let me do my roll call. Christopher, since you were the last to speak, your vote on that?
Yes.
Okay, Patricia Pecknick.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Joe Morgan.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Zamba.
Yes.
Okay, Patrick. Oh, sorry, we'll skip Patrick. The chair is good with it, and I guess we're still without Malcolm, right? Yeah. Okay, so Ted, if you wanted to go to see the debate, good luck. We'll see how that one turns out.
Yeah.
And I will get in touch with you. I think I'll probably I'm sure I can get your contact information from the planning folks if I need it.
Perfect.
And we'll work that out over the next couple of days. Shouldn't take long. And what we'll do is see if this is I take this motion as that we're basically in favor with those changes, so we can then sign off on it here so that it can go back to Mass Historic for their, actually, let me go back, let me think. Oh, Andy, once we sign off, I believe if let me think. If we're making any change at all, Mass Historic will want to review it again, but this is so minor and we can tell, I don't think this is going to take long for Mr. Steinitz to turn around if we find out exactly what it is that's changed and so forth. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue, Ted, getting a quick turnaround on that change. So we'll get there, they're okay on that change and we can turn it around quickly so that you can, progress to getting the approval of the city and the mayor so that it can get the final approval and filing and all that good stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think highlighted markup version, metal signage should definitely, like you said, produce a quick turnaround time.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident because he actually has been able to turn something like that around in a matter of days for me on something. In fact, that example I was giving earlier, we were able to turn that around literally in a couple of days. So
I'm prepared to be very impressed. And thank you all for serving on the Historic Commission. It's really important work, so appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and thanks for your work on this. And we'll see if we can't get this expeditiously resolved.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Okay, not quite the last on the agenda. Last major application on the agenda, it revolves around 12-14 Harrison Street. An interesting DCOD advisory review where the applicant is applying for a special permit from the zoning board, zoning board of appeals, ZBA. We need to provide an advisory review. This, you might recall, was before us earlier because at that point it was less than a 25% demo, and we had given the okay for some what was deemed less than 25% demolition at the time, but a roof line change. I'm sure you remember this. They were going to raise the roof on this property on Harrison Street. I won't go into all the gory details, but the property is currently under a 3-year moratorium that was imposed due to they're going beyond the allocated amount of demo that was in their permit. So I don't want to say too much more than that. You probably will remember that. So the goal, normally this would be fairly straightforward. The applicant would make their presentation as to what they want to do, and our charter, according to ordinance, is to provide the ZBA with a historical report. So I'll just stop there rather than say more. And who is speaking for the applicant in this case? Is it the applicant or an attorney or what? Nice.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Mack. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine, Mr. Mack.
Okay.
I assume you're the functioning as attorney for the applicant, right?
I am hopefully highly functioning, but functioning nonetheless. I appreciate, this is my maiden voyage in front of this commission, and I appreciate the time, and I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm, toward the end of the agenda. This has taken an unusual path to get here, but this project was reviewed back in the spring. And at the time, Mr. Gray, the applicant, was seeking a special permit for nonconformities because he had no expectation that he would need to do anything with the framing of the walls. And this commission gave its approval or recommendation to the ZBA for that special permit, and it was issued. And just for point of reference, as part of the package, there's a letter that I wrote to the zoning board on September 14th, and Exhibit B is a copy of your review. And the project proceeded, and as Mr. Gray got into the project and removed the wallboard on the interior, he was working from inside out. It was observed that the framing was not only not the original framing and had been patched, but it was in such poor shape that it could not even be preserved and incorporated into the existing structure in a way that would meet the engineering drawings that were approved by the building department. And so the framing was removed, and if Mr. Gray could go back again, he would have paused the project and advised the ZBA of what he had discovered in the building department. But he didn't appreciate at the time that but taking the framing off or replacing the framing triggered the need for a different type of permit. So after the project stopped, we conferred with Mark Griffin was representing Mr. Gray at the time. He was unavailable due to scheduling in September, so I took over. And after conferring with the planning department, it was determined that the best path forward was to seek a DCOD special permit to account for the fact that the framing had to be replaced. And so that's what we've done. The project is exactly the same. There are no new drawings, there's no new design, there's no new architectural features. The siding's the same, the windows the same, everything's the same. The only difference that exists is the framing. And Daniel Webb, the structural engineer, is available to answer questions. The project architect, Mr. Gannick, is on as well, and Mr. Gray himself. So this project has already been reviewed, but it's triggered a second review because we're now seeking a different kind of permit. Everything visible from the outside is exactly the same. Again, this commission found that many of the features that were part of the project, in fact, restored some historical significance that had been altered, particularly since I think around 1980. It's an unusual path that has led us to this point. But the project really is unchanged, and we need to go back to the ZBA to get the DCOD special permit and hopefully not have a project that is stalled for years under the ordinance. But that's for the ZBA to determine.
Right.
My objective tonight is to see if you have any questions as to the framing. But that's the only aspect of this project from in its entirety that is changed. So that's what brings us here tonight. And I don't have anything more to say. I don't know whether Andy, I didn't realize that I wouldn't be able to share my screen since this is my maiden voyage here. I emailed you earlier a picture that of the framing that can explain as a good demonstrative aid for Mr. Webb to explain why the framing and how the framing was really deficient from a structural standpoint, and as well shows that there really isn't the original framing to begin with. It's a series of patchwork fixes that are really not even up to code either.
Can you see the screen, Mr. Mack?
I can.
Yeah, I'm actually, David sent the email at about 7:20 p.m.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Do you know
great.
which one of those images is the one you want to show?
I sent it to Andy after. It's not part of your package, but it's only
Right.
one photo, and hopefully he can bring it up, and then Mr. Webb, there it is.
Oh.
Mr. Webb can then walk us through that.
Oh, okay. So this is the photo you wanted to show?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
I guess this might be where I come in.
I think that's a good thing.
Who's speaking?
This is Dan Webb, Webb Structural Services. I was retained as the engineer for this project.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think, a pitch is worth 1,000 words, and this one's great. I think, starting from kind of right to left on the screen, short of my chicken scratch notes that part of them are even illegible, I think, but you can see over on the right, zooming in on it, is a little bit more of the original framing of the building, just by the characteristics of the wood. And you can even see how perfect. Thank you. How poorly configured it was. There could have also been a window alteration in this area at some point in time, but you can see how the framing is, clearly not up to code. The spacing is not appropriate. Wall sheathing is acting more as a structural element than a sheathing element. And the window is certainly not supported properly on its sides. So that's kind of what I would consider most vintage framing of this building. If you were to then hop all the way over to the left side of the building.
Well, just a quick question before we go. That big opening above your heads there, how did that happen? Like where the second floor is like partly missing there, was that?
Right. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was an existing opening for the stairway that was, poorly framed and kind of falling in.
Okay.
I say a lot of these buildings, the main structural characteristic out of these buildings is they stay up purely under habit.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and am I seeing this photo right? Like there's two gentlemen on the left and window right behind them where it looks like there's a stud that just stops, and rather than going all the way up to the upper plate. Am I seeing that right?
Oh, yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Right. In fact, the arrow is pointing pretty much in that direction. All right. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Andy, for the zoom. Yeah, looks like quite the hodgepodge. Well, okay. So I kind of interrupted you there. Why don't you go ahead with your exposition?
Well, if we could zoom back out again and
Yep.
there you go, over onto the left side. You can see this looks like a past renovation sometime, probably 70s, 80s. And you can see the quality of the work that they did is really terrible. They did not do this building any justice. The window was thrown in. They threw in a couple of extra studs next to one. There's no appropriate header.
Yeah.
I don't even think there's not even a proper sill to the window. So, that was done, 10, 15 years ago. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But then you can get to the most recent renovation, in my opinion, is over by the front door. Now, this one's pretty significant. Like the past two, I could almost imagine they were doing a window replacement.
Right.
Here, they've actually removed exterior sheathing of the building and
Huh.
replace some of it. And they tried to put some sort of header over the door, but you can see how, talking about discontinuous stud work,
Yeah.
there is no continuous stud work in this in this section of the building. So
And
You
the
know,
header isn't continuous either, looks like.
no, it's just, so, with historic restoration or renovation, you gotta have fabric that you can start with.
Yeah.
You can peel back a lot of stuff,
Right.
but like you got, plate girders at the top of the wall, sills that are good, some timbers that are good through the building that you can at least start to work with and build off of.
Mhm.
This, as you can pan out, if we could pan out again.
By the way, I hope they keep that nice hanging lamp there. I've got ones that are so.
Right. So I think, as you can see from this picture, there's none of that there.
Yeah.
There's just, and I rely on contractors, being an engineer, you don't necessarily want to get into the nitty gritty of means and methods. But, I would venture to say, I wouldn't be a stretch to say this became a safety hazard.
Yeah, I do see. So I see some braces there that are from, that obviously tie into the old timbers, but and you can see on the second floor, there are some of those. So how much of that timber framing is left at this point?
I would
That's
have
in-
to.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, are you there on that?
I'm here. The plans called out for a total interior demo with all new structural framing for the floor joists and ceiling joists.
I see.
So there is no existing timber framing that could be saved. So we had plans drawn to, which were submitted and approved upon, and this is all gone now.
Oh, okay. So that so to the left of the entrance here, where we're seeing that timber beam with the old style joists, sort of, not what's the word, set into it. I forget the term, but anyway, you see what I'm saying? Like, so that's all, you're saying that's already gone because you're going to reframe the whole thing.
It's conventional framing.
Yeah, I see.
And typically, when we enter into these kind of projects, the expectation is to save something.
Yeah.
You never want to be tearing down entire walls, just for kicks. When we were on site looking at this, my drawings did say, sister every wall with a new 2x6 wall to reinforce it. But I think it became pretty evident that there was no sistering to be had here.
Yeah. Okay. Was there any documentation of what as you got into it? Did anyone bother to, other than, photos kind of like the one we were looking at earlier, any other photos, from the purposes of a historical report by us, that would be helpful. So is there any documentation of what was there in any way?
There are some pictures. I think David submitted a package to Andy that had some pictures that we thought best depicted what we were dealing with.
Right. I believe those are at Exhibit DE, to my September 14th letter. I think that's all there is. But there were a series of several photos. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the information here.
All right. Okay. While Andy's doing that, I was just really curious, and I kind of kicking myself for not asking about this when we had the initial review. That I'll read you a brief excerpt from a letter from May 19th from Attorney Griffin about why. He's saying, and I'll quote here, quote, the project, quote, does not trigger the requirements for a DCOD special permit. The demolition threshold was not reached as no exterior building walls are being demolished. That's right. It actually says no exterior building walls are being demolished, unquote.
That
So,
was before, I'm sorry to interrupt.
yep,
That was before we had stripped the sheetrock and saw what we were dealing with on the inside.
yeah. So what the so the thought was that you could just strip the interior, and because the raising of the roof, like how was that going to be accomplished from an engineering point, without doing any wall demo? I'm just really curious about that.
Well, you don't necessarily demo the walls, but you do reinforce them to a state that they are load bearing,
Right.
Capable. So it isn't uncommon to, with a structure that is suitable for reinforcing, to lace in new material,
right,
to make it code compliant to today's staff.
Right. So okay. So the idea is you take off the interior wall, since you're demoing the interior anyway, and then you could get in there to do any reinforcing. Is that the idea?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. It looks like there's another beam right where it says first floor east wall. Looks like another beam that's cut off. Anyway, all right. Are these the photos that we were looking for earlier?
Yes.
Oof. Now that wall, yeah, this looks like it's looking towards the river.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, there's that bulkhead for the cellar entry there.
Yes.
And can you just clarify what is being asked of the commission right now?
Well, yeah, as I understand it, and I'm sure Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have to, our role is to give a historical report to the Zoning Board of Appeals about the historical characteristics of the house. Unfortunately, many of those are now no longer in existence. So that's why I asked my question about documentation. What documentation might there be of what was there before some of this demo was done?
Mr. Richards,
yes.
What you're looking at right now wasn't done by me. This was done by the previous owners.
Really?
The exterior wall that you're looking at right there, not the bracing, but if you're looking at that exterior wall, that's not me. That the existing framing had been taken out a long time ago and reframed to what you see here right now.
Yeah. Okay. So those are those like regular like 2x4 studs
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yes.
If I may interject, this is Mr. Mack again. I think, this is kind of it's an unusual situation, I'm sure, because really the review has already been done, and from an historical standpoint, all the features that really were at issue before when you reviewed this are the same now. The only thing that's different is the removal of the framing that didn't even it isn't even clear that it was the original framing at all, and it's not even safe according to the engineer. So from where I stand, it's kind of challenging because you're trying to do something retroactively, but it's really that if I could submit that the document or review that you would provide to the ZBA would be, if I were writing it, would be that you just restate the review that you made in May, and with the only changes not being, of any being necessitated by the structural deficiency of the framing, and not having any substantial detrimental effect on historical features. Something along those lines.
The time for the applicant's presentation is up. I'm keeping track of 15 minutes, and I'd like to know what is expected of the commission. Are we voting on historically significant and preferably preserved?
No, it's Patricia. It's one of those. This permit is where we have to. It's a little bit like the Institution for Savings. We have to prepare a historical report. In this case, it's not for the planning board; it's for the ZBA. So the ZBA is the permit granting authority here. So they're looking for a permit from the ZBA. So we don't need to make a motion. motion on, in fact, we already did that. We voted and it was deemed historically significant and preferably preserved back some, a few months ago. And they had the okay to, well, let me make sure I'm not making a mistake. No, I think we sent, I think we did send a report to the ZBA back. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The ZBA back then was just voting on the upward extension of the nonconformity, where it's an upward extent that they had an existing nonconformity in, the roof or something. And since they were raising the roof, there was a roof line change, and that existing nonconformity was being extended. So they needed a permit for that. So I hope I'm not muddying the waters here.
I'd like to, are we going to be allowed to speak?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I know I've been kind of monopolizing this with my questions. I'll just add one more just so we're all straight here, because I see a lot of new lumber and some older stuff. And I just want all of us to be able to understand what was there when was Mr. Gray purchased the place. Was all this interior gone then?
Yes, Mr. Richards, what you're looking at right now is what we exposed when we took down the sheetrock.
Okay, so these missing floors and stuff, is that?
Oh, no, the missing floors were from us. We were taking the interior out. Most of that hole was from the stairwell and the chimney.
Right. Okay. And all this 2x4 bracing, this stuff that you did to just to stabilize
the 2x4
things.
bracing was for us to try to support the structure as we moved through it.
Okay. All right. Okay. I know people on the board want to speak, and I think there's a member of the public that has a comment as well. Patricia, I know you've been wanting to ask.
There's a member of the public. Why don't we close the applicant's presentation and mute the applicants and then open it to public comment? And when that's closed, I have things to say as well. Thank you.
Okay, that I had similar thoughts myself. So thank you, Ms. Vice Chair, for that suggestion. I think I will accept that suggestion. So this is formally, we're not required to take public comment, but I think I see there is a member of the public whose name I recognize, in fact, that would like to make a comment, and I will allow that. Ms. Niketish, looks like Andy has enabled your audio. So if you want to make a brief comment, please, with respect to the time, try not to be as long-winded as me and make your comment.
I will try very hard, Chairman Richards.
Well, it's a low bar.
Niketich, 93 High Street. I have followed this application from its beginning. So my concerns may not be so much addressed to you, Mr. Chairman, as to Director Port. This is happening backwards. So you're looking at a project which is currently under a zoning violation and building stop order. Mm-hmm. And the zoning violation appeal was continued to way after this. So this is, I think, it's a legal manipulation of the public's process. And I disagree with it. And I think the planning office should have stopped it. And what you're talking about, all of this discussion, which has become very long, I think, is an attempt through photographs to prove to make findings under our DCOD ordinance that the applicant never bothered to find in the first place. And again, because I would prefer that the appeal had gone forward before you had to do anything else as the historical commission.
This is Director Port.
No, Andy, may I'm just so frustrated because, in fact, before Bob Armstrong resigned, I know that he went to this site at a foundation review and told the building crew to stop their demolition. This was at least a week before. It finally came down to a stop work order and a zoning violation. So there's no excuse in this case that this applicant didn't understand they were doing something wrong under our laws. And I really would just wish we could go back to the normal procedure of, let them go through the appeal. And this is backwards.
The appeal, you're referring to the appeal of the stop of the 3-year
I'm
moratorium?
referring to their appeal, which is now, continued to December of a zoning violation.
Right. That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this is, I love all the bro conversation stuff here from photographs, but no, this is not how it works.
Right. Yeah, well, I think we can acknowledge that it's not a normal procedure here. And
No,
did you want to?
It's frustrating, Mr. Chairman, because, we go through this all the time and it's very frustrating. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're finished. Andy, did you want to respond to
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure
that
Ms.
bit?
Nicotic was finished with her comments
Yep.
first. I didn't want to
Yep.
interrupt. I just wanted to respond to that. Are you all set, Stephanie? Or
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to clarify there are several different things going on right now, as Ms. Nicotic has pointed out. There's the appeal of the enforcement that was issued by the zoning administrator and the building commissioner, telling the property owner and the contractors to stop doing work on the property until this issue was resolved. And what I wanted to draw your attention to is, as I'm just shifting on the screen here, the applicable provision, which is in the zoning ordinance. So this is in the demolition control overlay district section of the zoning ordinance. It's underneath this procedure and criteria section, and it's the last item, number 8. And then I've highlighted here the part that is the trigger here. So what the applicant has done here is ask for this written approval, because without this written approval from the Special Permit Granting Authority, which is the SPGA, that's actually the ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals. Without that written approval that they're asking for right now, no building permits can be issued. No other building permits can be issued for this property for 3 years under this ordinance, where the demolition work has been done without the DCOD special permit having first been obtained, which is what Ms. Nicotic, I think, was pointing out. It is true that the appeal before the ZBA has been continued. I don't know that, based on my experience, that's surprising that the applicant here for the appeal, the plaintiff or petitioner for the appeal, has asked for a continuance of that to see, well, this open demolition control overlay district special permit, to see where that goes with the Historic Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, as well as this so-called written approval underneath Section 8. Either one of those potentially acting as the Zoning Board of Appeals written approval to proceed with the project, or to do any type of work on the property within or before that 3-year period is over, because it's right now automatically engaged. But again, the Zoning Board of Appeals decided to grant an extension of that request for the appeal, so that could be considered at a future date. And I think that obviously what, as Stephanie and everyone else here this evening is aware, the Historic Commission is expected to comment on essentially an after the fact demolition control overlay district special permit. This section of the ordinance, Section 8, provides where there is a violation of the ordinance. The only way to get out of that is essentially this prior written approval from the ZBA. So the ZBA essentially saying, either they can proceed with the plans they originally had got approved, and this framing work that they've had to redo can proceed, or no, they cannot do that, anything during the 3-year period, or some sort of modified plans, whatever that may be, whatever that outcome is presumably going to be informed by the NHC and any other public comment that the ZBA gets. But it's the ZBA's discretion as to whether or not to grant an extension on the appeal that happens to be happening simultaneously with this. When we spoke with the city's legal counsel about what the options were for addressing this situation here, we walked through them. I'm not necessarily sure. I won't speak to the merits of the appeal that have been filed, but there was discussion of this written approval section, which is clearly written to the ordinance as the mechanism by which to address the 3-year ban should an instance like this come up. And then there's also the DCOD special permit, which I think the awkwardness, and I think the chair was alluding to this right at the beginning, the awkwardness with this one, I guess, the unusual situation we have here is the Historic Commission might normally be saying perhaps the building, has some value to it, and features that should be preserved, and perhaps you might typically with this ordinance provision, you might recommend that the ZBA hire a consultant to take a look at that and sort of do a peer review inspection of the structural elements. However, we don't really have the same structure there today, so it's hard to see how that peer review could actually happen today in the way that it was normally originally contemplated to be done in the ordinance prior to demolition work. So I don't know what advice that means that the NHC, the Historic Commission, would give to the Zoning Board of Appeals, but it's for better or worse. Understanding Ms. Nicotick's comment, the Historic Commission still right now is legally, per all the ordinances and procedures, in a position to provide a recommendation to the ZBA relative to the demolition work, and obviously anything else that it feels fit to comment on. But the ZBA will be essentially in the position under this ordinance here of both looking at the DCOD special permit and making a decision whether or not to grant one after the fact in this case, and whether or not that's even eligible to the applicant based on the criteria, the findings that have to be met by the ZBA, or whether or not to grant this written approval. But that is the decision of the ZBA, and it is informed by the Historic Commission. So I still recommend and still think that this Historic Commission has to operate as if that is the process that's playing out, because whether that may be frustrating to certain parties or not, that is the legal framework that we're all stuck within right now.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. All right, I'm going to close the public comment period, and I have my own thoughts, but before I go further, Patricia, I noticed your hand is still up. Did you have either a question or comment? Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead,
yes.
Patricia.
Oh, definitely. As to Andy's explanation, this commission must absolutely recommend to the ZBA that the moratorium on the building permit not be lifted. The district data sheet, as you'll recall from our meeting in the May, listed this house as circa 1750 to 1800, a contributory structure with a central chimney gambrel roof. The Form B listed as 18th century Georgian and said, this house is an excellent example of the 2.5-story gambrel roofed homes built in Newburyport during the 18th century. This form occurs less frequently in the Joppa area than in the South End. This house was undoubtedly built by one of the prosperous mariners or fishermen that settled on the banks of the Merrimack River. In the mid-19th century, it was owned by the Lunt family, who were very active in the shipbuilding and fishing industries. The only reason that Mr. Gray got any kind of permit to do work on this house from the ZBA is that this commission assured that permit grantor that the work that Mr. Gray proposed to do would not harm the integrity of this house as an historic property. The destruction of this house resulted in the loss of an architectural asset that benefited the neighborhood, the community, and the city of Newburyport. The applicant should have immediately returned to this commission to seek guidance about what to do if problems were encountered in the field. The careful deliberations and recommendations of this commission acting under the demo delay ordinance were ignored. In preparation for our spring demo delay hearing, I did Google image 12 Harrison Street for sale. And I pulled up photos of the house when it was listed. You can do the same thing when it was listed in December 2019. I encourage you to do so. The previous plans recommended for approval by this commission attached to the historic structure with its historic framing. That historic framing no longer exists, so the plans cannot attach to it. The NHC has the right to review new plans without being bound to any conditions, recommendations that were made relative to the proposed expansion of the no longer existing historic structure. During the April 9th hearing on whether the house is historically significant, Mr. Gray stated that Jennifer Blanchett had told him that the house is historically significant. Chair Richards stated that the main part of the house is historically significant, and Mr. Gray said, quote, "I agree. This reporting is posted under the NHC minutes." I did consult with several people affiliated with the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions about this house, mostly people in preservation planning, community planning and economic development, preservation consulting and landmarks. And one guy wrote and said, you know, everything pre-1800 out here is below grade, so you're lucky you have that house. And I said, well, we don't anymore after 220 to 270 years.
Thank you, Patricia. Were you all set? Okay, I see you nodding. Your hand is still up, by the way. And I'm glad we have your video back as well. Yeah, I'll just, while I made a little note that kind of summarizes my thoughts, that it's very sad that this, what was a lovely old house, has been lost, but that probably happened nearly 40 years ago when it was converted into apartments. I suspect that's when a lot of this damage was done. But anyway, how about anyone else on the board like to make a comment before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I will.
That sounded like Peter?
Yes.
Peter.
I second and thank Patricia for, I second Patricia's comments. I thank her for the research and the specifics and quoting the record. All of that is good. I fault her for several times referring to this structure, but she did pull out at the end and say that the structure no longer exists, because we're talking about something that isn't there anymore. I sympathize with Mr. Gray because it is true. You can't see inside the walls, and you start to work and things are in rough shape. So Chairman Richards, the point that you just made that the building that we're lamenting its loss was probably lost decades ago. And there was no way of knowing that until opening it. However, I think it was Mr. Mack who read from Mark Griffin's letter from back in May, where Mr. Gray's own attorney said that that there would be no intentional demolition of the structure.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah. So, given that the applicant and his attorney both put that in writing, that there would be no intentional demolition, and given that we know that such demolition is significant, in other words, removing the building, it's reasonably significant. I'm not buying the fact that we just forgot to notify, that we forgot to pause and get the appropriate permission under this section 28F.8. So I second what Patricia was just saying. I think that we make the appropriate recommendations to the ZBA to impose a moratorium.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anyone else like to make a comment?
Yeah, I'll just,
Christopher, yeah.
I'll just, I guess, pile on. Yeah, I personally do not understand how, after what I recall to be two different meetings, one in which the applicant brought an attorney, the attorney lectured this body about what we were allowed to decide on or not to decide on. And after I thought we're relatively clear about the historic nature of this home, and that's our purview to determine that the applicants and the people working for him, including the attorneys, continued to demolish this house. It just boggles my mind that nobody would have stopped and said, uh-oh, we have a problem here. Okay, I can see it if you don't go through the process and you just figure, well, you can do whatever you want. But we had been through the process. And twice, I believe it was twice, assurances, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to. We asked them to change the design. We raised concerns about features of the house that we didn't consider historically accurate, like a roof deck. And yet here we are. And then you wake up one day and you go, it appears that the house is sort of gone. You know, this was assured to be an improvement on the house. That's what the neighbor said, this will be an improvement. It does not appear to be an improvement. And that's all I'll have to say on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm frantically typing down these comments to capture them. All right, well, unless there's any more comments from the team here, I think I want to wrap this up. I'll kind of reserve the right to consult with you guys further on this. I'll put together some notes that might constitute a report, but I think given the nature of this, I'll make up a draft and we can come back to it to see if everyone feels that what I come up with as a draft is adequate to the situation. Okay.
Well, can I have just a brief moment?
Is that Mr. Mack?
Yes, please.
Brief,
very
please.
Brief. Yes, I appreciate it. First, I obviously was not at any of the prior meetings, and I myself, I was a planning board member in Beverly for close to 15 years. And certainly there were times, and I remember myself being perturbed at the fact that work was done in the field that probably should not have been done. But I do think that from where we are now, all the interior work, the framing is the thing that changed. The rest of the interior work was all work that had been approved by the building department, by the ZBA, and the issue with the framing is that all the changes that have been done to this structure were done to remove historical features, and the project is, I get it. Believe me, I get it. I've been in your position before about things happening in the field, and it's regrettable. And we stopped the work as we were told to do, and sought a bunch of different avenues to try to get the best path forward. And one would be to appeal it and spend 2 years in litigation. I don't think that helps anybody. The other is to try to figure out a way to rectify the situation and not have this eyesore, obviously, sitting there for 3 years. And if it weren't an issue of structural integrity and safety, as stated by the professionals, I'm not a professional when it comes to construction. I would never pretend to be. That's one thing, but it wasn't a preference to take this down. It wasn't to save money. It wasn't because they didn't like it. It was necessitated. And yes, it was a mistake not to stop. But the structural work that was being done in the interior to gut it, that was all approved work. The only thing that's changed is the framing. Every historical feature that was approved before has not changed, down to every single screw that will be visible from the street.
Yeah, I got it, Mr. Mack. Thank you. I sort of cut you off there. Is that
no? I
okay
appreciate
to
it,
stop there? Okay.
And I am getting redundant. I appreciate it.
Okay, very good. All right, thanks for your comment. And I'll just end by saying I'm sure there'll be more to come on this in discussions between the city and the owner and the applicant and all that good stuff. So we'll see what happens. All right, thank you all for sticking with it. There's actually just two more quick items on the agenda. There's the approval of the October 8th minutes. Did you all have a chance to look at those? I know I gave a minor correction to Gretchen, which she's put in. Is anyone have any issue with the minutes, or can we have a motion to approve those from last week? 2
I
weeks
make a
ago?
motion to approve them, and thank you, Gretchen, again.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay,
Second.
thanks. Okay, boy, I wish I could do like I know on the planning board they do this where they say, okay, I'm gonna assume it's passed unless someone speaks up to say against, but I don't know, I'll just continue the roll. It doesn't take that long. Christopher?
Yes.
Okay, Patricia?
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Okay, Ron Ziemba?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Okay, myself as chair, and I guess we're going to assume Malcolm's not around, so those are approved. Just really quickly, I know Andy just had a couple of quick, or a quick comment to make about this public comment emails to board members. Andy, do you want to just real quick go over that, either you or Caitlin?
Yes, thank you. I'll be brief. I know it's been a long meeting this
Yep.
far. Quick discussion. We just wanted some feedback from the Historic Commission members. The mayor had a suggestion and our office is trying to implement it to the extent that, where it technically is feasible and the board members feel comfortable with it. What we're trying to do is essentially make it possible when the general public wants to submit comments for those comments to go more quickly and directly to the board members as opposed to being routed through the staff then spending sometimes a good amount of time, depending on the application and what's going on with it, compiling those comments, posting them, distributing them to board members. I think that would address, there's a goal here is addressing two real things. One is that anybody who's interested in submitting comments can know that those comments are going immediately out to board members. I don't know if that's been an issue. We've been packaging the comments. For instance, the planning board, from what we can tell, likes the comments packaged before the meeting. So they're all kind of organized in one place, as opposed to sort of sporadically getting emails when people submit them, which is how they tend to come in from people. So that's one thing it accomplishes, is just having it go streamlined straight out to the board members. The other thing that is accomplished by it is just sort of, or one of our goals here, we might need to look into this a little further, is trying to automate that such that the staff don't have to devote time to basically acting as relays to the board, but that can be somewhat automated. So again, our time can actually be focused on more substantive actions we can take and work we can do. So, we just wanted your feedback on that. What we have come up with thus far based on the website, the city's website's capabilities and our email system in the city is that what we would propose, I guess, at this time, anyway, if the board is interested, and we're asking all the boards, all the permitting boards this question, is if we had essentially an email address that, let's say, was historiccommission@cityofnewburyport.com, one email address for this particular board, and that email address then distributed a copy of whatever emails are sent by folks to that email address out to all the board members. All the board members would get a copy of what's been sent to the board. The city obviously would have, this record of whatever has been sent to the board on whatever particular matters. Obviously staff can be informed of what those comments are as well. But that would be essentially streamlined a bit from where it is today. The one notable difference, I guess I would say with that, is that you might get comments sporadically from folks about applications or matters before the commission, rather than if we are compiling those and sending them out to the board or posting on the website. There's pros and cons to different options, and some things are things we are technically capable of doing now. Some things we are not, primarily because of the limitation that our website has or that our email system has. But we wanted your thoughts on what works for you and how you feel about that, so we can essentially try to implement whatever is, one of my goals is always to try to look for the most efficient way to get certain things done. So again, we can spend more of our time on substantive issues. We look for your thoughts on this. Right now it's manageable for us to sort of handle the types of comments that come in, but when we get a big project, one of which you had on your agenda tonight, or one or two you had on your agenda, we tend to get inundated with comments, and at those times it seems to make sense we try to at least automate. So just look at your thoughts.
Yeah, can I say something quickly? I would prefer this system because my college email address is easy to find online, and sometimes people do write to me because they're abutters, or they have a PR on their house, or they're applicants, or they've come before the commission before and they're asking a question about something, and it's very awkward and weird and convenient. And I'll tell Glenn, I got this email, let me forward it, or I'll send it to you Andy and say, Caitlin, Andy, here, I got this question.
Yeah.
I'd rather not be in that position anymore. I would much prefer that people know how to submit things and that it goes to everybody. So I would like the new system better.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And is there any timeline for when you guys hope to do something like this or goal? or anything?
Well, again, we try to coordinate with the chair and vice chair just to make sure before we roll out that it kind of makes
Sure.
sense. But I think what we're hoping to do is just finish up this similar question with the Conservation Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, just to make sure we've got everybody's
Mhm.
feedback.
Right.
And then circle back on implementation. Essentially, we might have, depending on the board, we might have slightly different perspective about what works. But obviously our goal is to try to, streamline and make things easier for folks where possible.
Yeah. Okay. So I will just say in the not too distant future. And has, I've seen two ways of doing this. One is to have a contact form on the website and the other way is to just say comments can be sent to, and there's the email address. It could even be a live link. You click it and it launches your email program with the email address already in there, and you just basically send your email. I personally kind of prefer that second method rather than those contact forms. I find them a bit awkward. Have you guys thought about that at all? Which way you think you might go?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think we could do it both ways, but I also tend to like the, using the direct emavery address and using their native application to do it as opposed to the website.
Yeah, it just seems a little easier. It's more straightforward. Okay. All right. Well, very good. Any other member of commission have any feedback for Andy on that? Okay. Well, I'm definitely with Patricia on this one because I occasionally, actually what happened for a lot of those IFS Institution for Savings comments, I got two versions. One because they would copy me on the comment that they sent to, let's say, Caitlin or whomever, and then I would get from the office, I'd get another copy of the same thing. So yeah, this would definitely streamline things, and I'm sure give some relief to your staff too, Andy. So yeah, so let's see if we can't get everyone on the same page and get this thing done. So thanks, Andy.
Thanks for your feedback.
Sure. Adjournment.
I move to adjourn. Oh, I move that we adjourn.
You're not anxious to adjourn, are you?
No, I thank everybody. It was a very long meeting, but I think a very good meeting, and I really appreciate that everyone is willing to serve on the commission and do such a good job.
We're 15 minutes earlier than I bailed on the planning board last night, and they were still going at it. So you guys consider yourselves lucky.
Yeah.
All right,
We're
there's a
not
motion.
done yet. We're not done yet.
I know there's a motion to adjourn on the floor. Is it seconded?
Second.
Okay. 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 Peter, since you're the last to speak, your vote?
Yes.
Mr. Fay?
Yes.
Ms. Pecknick?
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Ziemba? We lose Ron? Where is he? I see his name there, nothing else. Well, maybe he already adjourned. Okay, well, I'm going to, let's see, I think with my vote, that makes at least a majority. So we may consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you so much for your attention throughout this. And I've got some homework to do on some of these things. So, but we'll see. I think it was a productive meeting though, and I appreciate your guys' attention and all that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Andy and Caitlin, for helping manage the call.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
And
Thank you.
I wish you all a good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Good night.